So I walk into my dad's office, and there, in the lobby waiting for my dad, is a crack dealer named Corn Dog. Corn Dog just stares at me with these cold, dead eyes. But I just stare back. Because looking at me and my dockers, you know I'm no stranger to the streets. I'm also not intimidated because Corn Dog, well, he dead. But it's not uncommon for murdered drug dealers to hang out in my dad's office because Dad was a medical examiner to Detroit, Michigan. Or as it's known among medical examiners, the show. I grew up in the morgue working for my dad since I was in junior high. And in that time, I had learned many things. I had learned never order barbecue after an arson autopsy. Yes, it smells exactly the same. I bet some of you are glad that there was not a barbecue truck here tonight. I learned never to mention where I work on a first date. Even in high school, not even the goth chicks thought it was sexy. I also learned that murder trials in Detroit are an absolute crapshoot. This was especially useful because I had recently, in my father's view, made a poor life choice and graduated law school. I was now working in the Detroit prosecutor's office in the homicide unit. Now, homicide trials were such a gamble for several reasons. First, we rarely had any physical evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA. Just to be clear, comparing local law enforcement to CSI, it's like comparing NASA to Star Trek. Most of our cases depended on witnesses who were usually very reluctant to testify, which is understandable if you have ever heard the Detroit slogan of community love, snitches get stitches. Which isn't even that accurate, but rhymes better than snitches get shot in the head, stuffed in the trunk of a car, and left at long-term parking at the airport. Sometimes, even homicide victims refuse to cooperate. Yes, you heard that correctly. One case, a guy was shot 5 times in the chest, but he was still alive when the first unit responded. The patrolman tried to get the victim to ID the shooter before he bled out. The guy's last words were, "Thank you, officer, but I prefer to handle this myself." But the biggest problem was that almost every defendant would argue self-defense. See, in Detroit, 3 out of 5 people have handguns. The other 2 wish they did, because one of them is about to be a victim of the other 3. But any shooter could always claim about his victim, "I thought he had a gun." Despite all these obstacles, I was convinced it would be different for me. Why? Because I had been endowed with the delusional self-confidence and pure ego that can only exist in the mind of a recent law school graduate. I was hungry for justice. I saw myself as Bruce Wayne. And I mean the cool Christian Bale one, not Val Kilmer, and please, not Ben Affleck. My dad tried to temper my expectations, telling me, "Son, you're a Lions fan, so you're well aware that life is not about winning." But I was convinced that Corn Dog's case could be my first big win. Now, it is true, Corn Dog was definitely not a sympathetic victim. To call Corn Dog a crack dealer was actually an insult to crack dealers. Corn Dog oftentimes wouldn't even bother to sell crack. He would instead try and pass off ivory soap carved to look like crack. Even his nickname was evidence that he was an asshole. Corn Dog was so named because one night he was beating up his girlfriend, and in a desperate attempt to defend herself, she stabbed him in the head with a broken broomstick handle. It didn't do anything. He was still trying to hit her when the cops showed up responding to the domestic call with about 1.5 feet of broom in his head. But to credit to her, she jammed that thing in so hard that at the ER, the docs weren't able to remove it. They just sawed off as much of the wood as they could and had to leave a chunk of the broomstick in his head. Y'all go home with that image. So Corndog had made many poor choices in his life, but he had the wisdom to do one thing right, and that was to get blown away in broad daylight in front of a security camera at the hair salon where his mom worked. We had a pretty good case, and I was assigned to work it with a legend in the prosecutor's office. I was assigned to work with Bobby Boppin. Bobby Boppin, smooth as silk, soft as cotton. That's what it said on his business card. Bobby had started out as a defense lawyer, and he had defended half the pimps in Detroit, most of whom had apparently paid Bobby in clothing. One day, Bobby glided into my cubicle, because Bobby was that smooth, he glided everywhere. He looked at me, he said, "You that white boy they were gonna send me?" As if he had ordered me on eBay. Before I could answer, he said, "Your job is to make sure the defendant cannot claim self-defense." And then he glided away. This was not going to be easy, because Corndog had been armed when he got popped. But through sheer dumb luck, I found phone records which showed that the shooter had lured Corndog to the hair salon. So we could now argue that the shooting had been premeditated, which would completely shut down self-defense claim, and we could now charge the defendant with first-degree murder, which is an automatic life sentence. Bobby immediately promoted me from that white boy to sharp motherfucker. I'm not kidding, that's how he introduced me at meetings. This is that sharp motherfucker I was telling you all about. Come on in here. So we had a solid case. I was going to get my first big win, and nothing could go wrong. Until we discovered one small problem. We were sort of prosecuting the wrong guy. We had indicted a wannabe thug named Timmy Smith. Now, Timmy was new to gang life, as demonstrated by the fact that his street name was Timmy Smith. Timmy had been hanging with a crew run by a shot caller named Gangster Garrison. Gangster, as his name implied, was hardcore. Gangster hated Corndog because Corndog had been slinging rock in Gangster's territory. And not only that, when people complained to Corndog about the quality of his product, Corndog, in a brilliant marketing move, told them he got it from Gangster. Now, the video confirmed that Timmy Smith was the shooter, but it was clear that Gangster had put him up to it. It was also clear that Timmy was not going to flip on Gangster. At this point, I realized this was not going to be my big win. I also realized I was not Batman. And I realized that many of the things my father tried to tell me he had been right about. I went to Bobby and told him that I did not think Timmy Smith deserved to spend the rest of his life in prison. Bobby gave me a long, hard look, and then he said, "I knew you were my shot, motherfucker." Bobby had already come to the same conclusion long before I had. Timmy Smith was convicted of manslaughter and ended up serving 3 years. Gangster's name wasn't mentioned once at the trial. But less than a year later, Gangster tried to rip off another dealer he thought was soft. She wasn't. Gangster wound up in my dad's lobby. And maybe I'm just a glass half full kind of guy, but I like to think of that as a win. And the shooter, well, when she was arrested, her statement to the cops, and I quote, was, "Gangster, he begged like a bitch." Before she gave him both barrels from a sawed-off. She claimed self-defense and was acquitted. Thank you.